Let your eyes close. Let the weight of the day settle into the mattress beneath you, the pillow beneath your head. You have nowhere to be. Nothing needs your attention. The world outside is doing just fine without you for a few hours, and everything that needed doing today has been done or can wait until tomorrow. Right now, there is only this: the warmth around you, the darkness, the slow and steady rhythm of your breathing. Take a long breath in through your nose. Hold it for just a moment, and then let it go. All of it. Every last bit of tension you were carrying in your chest and your shoulders and your jaw. Do that again. Breathe in slowly. Feel your ribcage expand, your belly rise, and release. Good. Again. Tonight, I am going to take you somewhere. Not anywhere wild or dangerous or dramatic. Not the high mountain passes or the open plains or the churning rivers of the frontier. Tonight, I am taking you somewhere warm and enclosed and full of extraordinary things. Tonight, I am taking you to a fur trading post on a quiet autumn day in the early 19th century. A day when the season is turning, when the air has that particular crispness that comes in October, when the leaves on the river cottonwoods have gone gold and the first snow has already fallen on the high country above. A day when the post is alive with activity and the smells of the trading room and the cook fires and the river are all mixed together into something that, once you have known it, you never entirely forget. Let yourself drift toward that place, now. The words will carry you. There is no hurry, no destination. Just the slow, easy unfolding of a day that ended a long time ago, in a world that was extraordinary, that was real, and that is yours to inhabit tonight for as long as you like. We begin before dawn, in the last hour of darkness, when the trading post is still and quiet, and the only sounds are the river and the wind. The post sits on a low bluff above the Missouri River, at a bend where the water slows and deepens and the far bank is thick with cottonwood and willow. It has been here for 7 years, long enough for the cottonwood logs of the outer walls to have weathered to a soft silver grey, long enough for the ground around it to have been worn smooth by the passage of hundreds of feet, long enough for the vegetable garden inside the courtyard to have developed a deep, rich tilth from 7 autumns of composted kitchen scraps. The post is built in a style common to frontier trading establishments of the era, a rough square of timber walls, each side perhaps 120 feet long, with the corners reinforced by diagonal bracing and the tops finished with pointed stakes that lean outward at an angle. This style of construction is called a palisade wall, from the French word palisade, meaning a fence of pales or stakes. The logs that form it were cut from the surrounding forest by the post's original builders, squared with broadaxes, and set vertically in a trench dug around the perimeter. The trench was then backfilled and tamped, holding the logs upright as firmly as if they had been planted there by nature. Inside the walls, the buildings of the post are arranged around the central open courtyard that the French called the parade. There is the main trading house, where the actual business of exchanging furs for goods takes place. There is the warehouse, a long, low building where the furs are stored, pressed, and prepared for their journey downstream. There is the blacksmith's shop, where the ring of hammer on anvil will begin again in a few hours. There is the carpenter's shed, the kitchen and its attached mess hall. The ice house, sunk into the earth to keep provisions cool in the summer months. The stable, the powder magazine. A small, separate building positioned well away from the others, because its contents, if ignited, would take everything else with it. And there are the sleeping quarters. The bourgeois' room, large and relatively comfortable by frontier standards. The men's barracks, where the engagés sleep in 2 rows of wooden bunks. And the small, separate cabin near the north wall where the post's interpreter lives with his wife and their 2 young children. In this last quiet hour before dawn, all of these buildings are dark and silent. The cook fires have burned down to coals. The horses in the stable shift and snuffle softly. A dog, one of the 3 that live at the post, a large, heavy-coated mixed breed of obscure ancestry that the men call Batten for the white marking on his tail, lifts his head from the ground near the kitchen door, considers some sound, or smell carried on the wind from the river, and settles again with a long sigh. Baton is 7 years old, which means he was born at the post and has never been more than a few miles from it. He knows every person here by smell as well as by sight, and he has a finely calibrated sense of their moods and intentions. He knows, for instance, that the night watchman who has just completed his circuit of the outer walls, a young Creole man named Baptiste Gagnon, who has been at the post for 2 years, is tired but relaxed, which means there is nothing unusual outside. He knows that the wind coming off the river tonight carries the smell of coming rain, which will arrive by midday. He knows, from the particular quality of the darkness and the sound of the river, that dawn is not far away. He settles his heavy head back onto his paws and closes his eyes. There is still time to sleep. Let yourself rest as deeply as Barton rests now. Let every muscle in your body go soft and heavy. The post is quiet around you. The river murmurs in the darkness below. The stars are beginning to pale at the eastern edge of the sky. The man who runs this post is named Edouard Larocque. He is 43 years old, though he looks older. His face is deeply weathered, etched with the lines that come from years of squinting into river glare and prairie wind. And his hair, once a dark brown, has gone mostly grey at the temples. He is not a tall man, but he is solid and deliberate in his movements, with the particular physical confidence of someone who has spent his adult life in places where physical competence was not optional. He is what the fur trade calls a bourgeois, a word that in this context does not carry its usual connotations of middle-class respectability, but rather refers to the man in charge, the partner or hired manager who is responsible for the post's operation, its accounts, its relationships, with the indigenous peoples who trade here, its supply of goods, and the welfare of the men under his direction. The bourgeois is judge, employer, diplomat, accountant, and father figure all in one. It is not a simple job. Larocque has been in the fur trade since he was 17 years old, when he signed his first contract as an engagé, a laborer bound, by a standard 3-year agreement to serve the fur company in exchange for wages, food, and equipment. He worked his way up through the ranks over the course of 20 years. Paddler, steersman, interpreter, clerk, and finally bourgeois, posted to this stretch of the Missouri River 6 years ago with instructions to build and maintain a profitable operation in a region that was both rich in furs and contested by multiple indigenous nations. He wakes before anyone else, as he always does. It is his habit and his preference. He likes the early hours, the stillness of the post before the day begins, the privacy of thought that comes when everyone else is still asleep. He rises from his wooden-framed bed, whose mattress is a ticking bag stuffed with cattail down. Expensive cotton batting is reserved for the sick room. He dresses in the dark, by touch, linen shirt, woolen trousers, leather vest, heavy-soled boots. He runs his fingers through his hair and does not trouble with a mirror. In the small outer room of the bourgeois' quarters, which serves as his office, his sitting room, and when important visitors are present, his dining room, there is a fireplace that was laid with fresh wood the evening before. Larocque kneels before it and strikes a spark with his flint and steel, touching the small coal to the prepared tinder of char cloth and dry grass, blowing gently until the flame catches and spreads. He adds a small piece of split pine, then a larger piece of oak. By the time he has water boiling in the iron pot that hangs from the crane over the fire, the room is beginning to warm. He drinks his coffee, a luxury that the fur trade made, available to the frontier long before most settlers in the eastern states could afford it regularly, because the trading posts were supplied with the same goods as the rendezvous caravans, and coffee was always on the list, and sits at his desk in the growing light. Before him are the account books of the post. 2 large ledgers, their covers made of stiff pasteboard backed with marbled paper, their pages covered in the careful, crabbed handwriting of the post's clerk. These ledgers are, in a sense, the heart of the post. They record every transaction, every pelt received, every knife traded, every pound of coffee or tobacco dispensed, every barrel of pork broached, every yard of trade cloth measured and cut. They are the evidence that the post is operating profitably, that the distant partners of the fur company will receive a return on their investment, that Larocque himself is managing the business competently. He reviews the previous day's entries, checks the totals, and makes a note in the margin regarding a discrepancy in the tobacco account that he will need to discuss with the clerk. Outside, in the gradually lightening courtyard, the first movements of the day are beginning. The watchman has completed his last circuit and is sitting by the kitchen door, waiting for the cook to begin the morning fire. The stable door creaks, as the stable hand, a young man of mixed Métis and Ojibwe heritage named Pierre Delorme, begins the morning feeding. The horses, 8 of them, a mixed collection of plains ponies and heavier American horses, announce their pleasure at his arrival with a soft chorus of nickers and shuffling. You are drifting now, aren't you? The sounds are soft and familiar. The fire crackles quietly. The light is growing, slowly and steadily, at the edges of the sky. Let your body be completely still. Before the day truly begins, let us take a moment, a slow, unhurried moment, to understand where this post sits in the larger world of its time. The year is approximately 1825. The Louisiana Purchase, completed in 1803, has officially extended United States sovereignty over the territory in which this post sits, but the practical reach of the American government is still extremely limited. There are no roads connecting this post to the settled American states. The nearest town of any significance is hundreds of miles away, accessible only by water, a journey of weeks upstream by keelboat, or a matter of days downstream by the current. The nearest military post is even further. In practical terms, this means that Larocque and his post operate in a world governed not by the laws of the United States or any other nation-state, but by the customs and practices of the fur trade, an international commercial system that had been developing for more than 2 centuries and that had its own rules, its own hierarchies, its own ethics, and its own culture. The fur trade of the early 19th century was dominated by 2 great companies: the Hudson's Bay Company, established by royal charter in 1670 and operating primarily in what is now Canada, and the American Fur Company, founded in 1808 by the German-born New York merchant John Jacob Astor, who would eventually become the wealthiest man in the United States on the strength of the beaver pelt trade. There were also smaller companies and independent operators, and in 1822, a new approach, the rendezvous system pioneered by William Henry Ashley, was beginning to challenge the trading post model for the mountain trapping country to the west. But here, on the Missouri River, the trading post remained the dominant institution. The Missouri was the great commercial highway of the interior, and the posts strung along it at intervals of 100 miles or so were its service stations and markets, places where the trappers and hunters of the wilderness could bring their furs, resupply, gather information, and briefly reconnect with some version of organized society before returning to the wilderness. A trading post on the Missouri might handle anywhere from 500 to several thousand beaver plues in a season, along with significant quantities of other furs: otter, mink, muskrat, fox, wolf, bear, and bison robes. The bison robe trade, in fact, was becoming increasingly important by the 1820s, as the beaver populations began to show signs of depletion in the more accessible areas. A prime bison robe, the thick winter hide of a cow bison, tanned by an indigenous woman using a labor-intensive process that involved brain tanning and extensive handworking of the hide, was worth between $2 and $4 in the trading room and could fetch twice that in the markets of the East. The goods that the post offered in exchange were carefully selected to match the needs and desires of both the trappers and the indigenous traders who were the post's primary customers. The list reads like a cross-section of the early 19th century's manufacturing world. Iron traps and steel knives from the forges of Pennsylvania, woolen blankets from mills in New England and England, glass beads from workshops in Venice and Bohemia, brass and copper kettles and other metalware from British and American factories, gunpowder and lead for ammunition, tobacco from Virginia and Kentucky plantations, sugar, coffee, and flour from the agricultural regions of the East, vermilion paint ground from cinnabar ore, silver trade ornaments, armbands, gorgets, earrings, manufactured by silversmiths who specialized in the Indian trade. Each of these items had its particular value in the trade, and the exchange rates were set by the company and enforced by the bourgeois. The basic unit of value in the fur trade was called the made beaver, a prime, dried beaver pelt of standard quality, 1.5 pounds in weight. All other goods and furs were valued in relation to the made beaver. A large wool blanket might cost 3 made beaver, a steel trap might cost 2, a pound of tobacco might cost 1, a glass bead necklace might cost 1/4. These rates were posted in the trading room and explained through interpreters to indigenous traders who were not yet familiar with them. The system was, it must be said, structured to the advantage of the trading company. The goods were priced at considerable markups over their St. Louis costs, and the furs were valued at below their eventual market price. But the trade was not purely exploitative. The goods offered were genuinely useful, often genuinely desired, and the relationship between a trading post and the indigenous nations it served was typically one of long negotiation and mutual adjustment, not simple imposition. Let the facts drift gently through your mind, soft as smoke. There is no test. There is no reason to hold on tightly to anything. Just let the images form and dissolve, the ledger books, the shelves of trade goods, the river below the bluff, and let your breathing slow. As the sky lightens from grey to the pale gold of early morning, the centre of activity at the post shifts to the kitchen, a large, low-ceilinged room at the south end of the main building, equipped with a massive stone fireplace that takes up most of one wall and a long wooden table scarred by years of use. The cook's name is Marie-Anne Beaulieu. She is 31 years old, the wife of the post's blacksmith, and she has been cooking for trading post crews since she was 16, when she married Jean-Baptiste Beaulieu and followed him west from the French-Canadian settlements along the St. Lawrence River. She is a small, efficient woman with dark eyes and strong hands and the particular quality of calm that belongs to people who have mastered their craft so completely that they no longer have to think about it. It simply flows. Marie-Anne's kitchen in 1825 is supplied with a range of ingredients that tell the story of a complex supply chain stretching from the Missouri wilderness to the farms and factories of the East. There is always cornmeal, which is ground from dried maize and forms the base of the post's most basic bread, a rough, dense corn pone baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven set directly in the coals. There is dried beans, navy beans, and black beans that have traveled upriver in barrels from St. Louis. There is salt pork packed in brine in wooden casks, which provides both the primary protein and the cooking fat for most of the post's meals. There is, in good times, a little white flour, fine milled wheat flour from mill towns in Ohio or Pennsylvania, reserved for special occasions or for the bourgeois table. The fresh food comes from the post itself and its immediate surroundings. The garden inside the palisade wall grows turnips, cabbages, onions and a few herbs, parsley, sage, thyme, in a small raised bed. The hunters who go out from the post most mornings when game is in the area bring back deer, elk, antelope, wild turkey, and in the right season, Canada geese and ducks in considerable numbers. The river provides catfish, and in spring, the extraordinary runs of paddlefish and various suckers that fill the Missouri's shallows as the ice breaks up. This morning, Marie-Anne is making a large pot of bean and salt pork soup, what the French-Canadian men call soupe au lard, that will feed the crew their midday meal. The beans were put to soak the night before and are now soft and swollen. The salt pork has been cut into cubes and rendered in the bottom of the pot until slightly crisp. The beans, onions from the garden, a bay leaf, and a handful of dried herbs are added, the whole covered with water, and the pot hung from the crane over the fire to simmer slowly for the next 6 hours. The breakfast she is preparing now is simpler. Cornmeal porridge, called mush in the American frontier tradition, or bouilli in the French-Canadian, cooked in a large iron pot with water and a little salt, and served with a spoonful of whatever sweetener is available, which this morning is a dark, strong molasses that arrived in the last supply boat as part of the trade goods inventory and found its way to the kitchen in the standard manner of such things. The smell of the mush cooking, of the salt pork rendering, of the wood, smoke rising from the kitchen chimney. These smells move through the still morning air of the courtyard and are the signal, more reliable than any bell, that the day has begun. One by one, the men of the post emerge from the barracks, pulling on their coats against the October chill, running hands through uncombed hair, moving toward the kitchen with the particular purposefulness of people who have been doing this same thing in this same sequence for months and years. They are a mixed group, French-Canadian engagés who form the backbone of the crew, hired on 3-year contracts. A few American trappers wintering at the post, the blacksmith, the carpenter, the clerk, the interpreter, and his family. They range, in age, from 17 to 52. They represent half a dozen languages and a dozen cultural backgrounds. They sit together at the long table and eat their mush with molasses and drink their coffee, rough, dark, strong coffee, boiled in an iron pot with a pinch of salt to cut the bitterness, and talk, or don't talk, in the easy, comfortable way of people who have been living at close quarters long enough that silence between them is not awkward. Feel the warmth of the kitchen around you now. The fire is bright. The mush is hot. The coffee steams in the thick pottery mug between your hands. Outside, the October morning is crisp and cold, but in here it is warm. Let your body feel that warmth. After breakfast, as the men begin their morning tasks, the blacksmith to his forge, the carpenter to the half-finished repair of a warehouse door, the hunters to their preparation for the morning's foray, the clerk opens the trading room. The clerk's name is Thomas Harrington. He is 24 years old, the son of a Philadelphia merchant and the most formally educated person at the post. He attended 3 years of the University of Pennsylvania before his father's business failed and the need for employment became urgent. Through a family connection, he was offered a clerk's position with the fur company, and he took it, not entirely willingly. He has been at the post for 14 months and has, in that time, developed a genuine fascination with the world. He has found himself in that he did not anticipate when he arrived. The trading room is the post's most important space, the room where the fundamental business of the fur trade is conducted, where pelts change hands for goods, where the accounts are kept, where the whole complex machinery of the enterprise is made visible and tangible. It occupies the front section of the main building, accessible from the courtyard through a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron straps, and from outside the palisade through a small window, the trade window, cut in the outer wall, covered by a wooden shutter that can be opened or closed from inside. This trade window is an important feature. It allows the trading room to conduct business with visitors who are not admitted inside the palisade walls, a necessary precaution in a world where the line between trading partner and potential threat could shift quickly. When indigenous traders arrived at the post in large numbers, as they sometimes did when a major band was camped nearby, the trading was typically conducted through this window, a few people at a time, with the goods displayed on a shelf just inside and the furs passed through the opening in exchange. The trading room's shelves and counters hold a carefully organized inventory that Thomas Harrington knows as well as he knows the contents of his own trunk. Let us walk through it together, slowly, in the way that a dream allows you to linger over details that the waking world rushes past. The trade blankets occupy an entire wall of shelves, sorted by size and quality. The standard trade blanket in the early 19th century was the Hudson's Bay point blanket, a heavy, tightly woven wool blanket made at mills in Oxfordshire, England, and stamped with short lines called points along one edge that indicated the blanket's size and weight. A 3-point blanket, measuring roughly 60 by 72 inches and weighing 3 pounds, was the standard trading size. A 4-point blanket was larger and heavier, worth proportionally more. The blankets came in several colors: white with black stripes, red with white stripes, green with yellow stripes. And they were among the most consistently valued trade goods across all indigenous nations and all seasons, because a good wool blanket kept a person warm even when wet, was durable, and could be used for everything, from bedding to ceremonial robes to trading currency in its own right. The Hudson's Bay Company blanket is one of the great success stories of early industrial manufacturing. The company had been ordering blankets from English weavers since the 17th century, and by the early 19th century the specification was so well established, the particular weight of wool, the particular tightness of the weave, the exact dimensions and the system of point markings, that a blanket produced in Oxfordshire could be sent across the Atlantic, up the St. Lawrence, across the Great Lakes, up the rivers of the interior, and arrive at a trading post on the Buckeye, Missouri River still meeting the exact standard that the indigenous trader on the other side of the trade window expected and required. This kind of product consistency, maintained across such enormous distances and supply chains, was a genuine achievement of the early industrial world. Beside the blankets, on lower shelves, are the knives. The trade knife was perhaps the single most universally useful item in the trading room. Most were made in Sheffield, England, the city that had been the centre of British cutlery manufacturing since the 14th century, when its abundant water power, local iron ore, and skilled craftspeople made it the natural home of the trade. Sheffield had been exporting knives to the North American fur trade since the 17th century, and by 1825, the trade knife was one of the most standardized objects in the world. A blade of 4 to 6 inches, a simple wooden handle, a plain iron bolster, sold in lots of a dozen wrapped in paper and packed in wooden crates. The knife that arrived at the trading room in this wooden crate had been made by a craftsman in Sheffield who had probably never seen a beaver or a bison in his life. It had travelled by canal to Liverpool, by ship to New York or New Orleans, by riverboat to St. Louis, by keelboat to this post on the Missouri River, and it would now be traded to a Lakota hunter or a Crow trapper who would use it for everything, from skinning game to cooking to personal defense to ceremonial use for the rest of its useful life, which would be many years if properly maintained. The journey of that knife, from the forge of Sheffield to the hands of a plains hunter, is a small, quiet miracle of the early 19th century global economy, which was already connecting the most remote corners of the world to the workshops of industrial England and the counting houses of New York and London in ways that were changing everything, though the people at either end of the chain were unlikely to be fully aware of it. Your mind can wander among these shelves now, softly and without urgency. The glass beads in their small cloth bags, seed beads from Venice, larger faceted beads from Bohemia, each one made by a glass blower who heated and shaped and cut glass in a workshop that might be 3,000 miles from this river. The bolts of Stroud cloth, a coarse, durable woolen fabric named for the English town of Stroud in Gloucestershire, where much of it was made, dyed in the brilliant reds and blues that were most prized in the trade. The small paper packets of vermilion, the brilliant red pigment ground from mercury sulfide ore and used as body paint and decoration by many indigenous peoples. The hawk bells, small, round, hollow brass bells the size of a large marble, which made a bright, clear ringing sound and were used decoratively on clothing, equipment, and horses. Let the colours and textures of the trading room surround you. The deep red of the Stroud cloth, the white and black of the blankets, the gleam of brass kettles, the dull shine of bundled steel traps, the small bright points of colour in the bead bags. Rest here. Of all the people at the post, none occupies a more complex or more important position than the interpreter. His name is Jacques Bellefeuille, and he is 37 years old, the son of a French-Canadian voyageur father and a Cree mother from the country north of Lake Winnipeg. He has, over the course of his life, acquired a working knowledge of 7 languages: French, English, Cree, Ojibwe, Lakota, a working vocabulary of Crow, and the hand sign language of the plains, which is not, strictly speaking, a spoken language at all, but a complete and sophisticated system of communication using hand and arm gestures that was understood across tribal and linguistic boundaries from the Mackenzie River in the north to the Rio Grande in the south, and from the Missouri in the east to the Rocky Mountains in the west. The existence of Plains Sign Language, sometimes called Plains Indian Sign Language, or PISL, is one of the most remarkable linguistic achievements in human history, and it deserves more than a passing mention as we sit here in the warm trading room on this autumn morning. Plains Sign Language developed over many centuries among the diverse nations of the North American interior, who spoke dozens of mutually unintelligible languages but needed to communicate across those linguistic barriers for trade, diplomacy, and the management of intertribal relationships. The system that evolved is a complete language. It has grammar and syntax. It can express abstractions and nuances. It can be used to tell stories and negotiate complex agreements, and it can be learned to functional fluency in a matter of months by a motivated student. The signs are largely iconic. That is, many of them visually resemble the things they represent. The sign for buffalo, for instance, involves placing the index fingers at the temples to suggest horns. The sign for river involves a sinuous horizontal movement of the hand. The sign for speak involves pointing two fingers from the mouth outward, like words emerging. But the system goes far beyond simple pictography. It has signs for abstract concepts, for time and quantity, and direction and relationship, for emotional states and intentions that can only be understood through learning and practice. Jacques Bellefeuille learned plain sign language from his mother's people as a child and has refined it through decades of use. He can hold a complete conversation in sign with a delegation of Crow or Blackfoot warriors who speak no Cree and no French, communicating not just simple trading propositions, but the subtle diplomatic nuances that are often more important than the trading itself. The fur trade ran on language in ways that are easy to underestimate. The difference between a successful trading session and a dangerous misunderstanding could be the difference between a good interpreter and a poor one. The difference between a profitable alliance with a particular indigenous nation and an ongoing state of hostility could often be traced to whether the bourgeois had someone who could truly bridge the linguistic and cultural gap between his world and theirs. Jacques performs this bridging function with a skill that Larocque genuinely values and occasionally forgets to fully acknowledge. A failure that Jacques notices without particularly minding, because he has been in this work long enough to understand that being undervalued is simply part of the interpreter's lot, and that the work itself is interesting enough to compensate. This morning, Jacques is sitting in the small anteroom between the trading room and the courtyard, mending a pair of moccasins, with an awl and a length of sinew, and talking to his daughter. She is 5 years old and is named in the French manner Félicité, though everyone at the post calls her Fée, fairy, for the light-footed way she moves through the post's spaces. She is asking him questions about the day in the quick, unpredictable way of 5-year-olds, switching between French and the Cree that her mother speaks to her at home, and Jacques is answering her in kind, switching languages mid-sentence with the ease of long practice. The sound of their conversation, soft, bilingual, affectionate, drifts through the trading room as Thomas Harrington sorts through a box of trade-alls, counting and recording. He smiles without particularly noticing that he does. Let that sound drift through your mind now, soft and light. 2 languages, interweaving. A father and his daughter on a quiet autumn morning, while the fire crackles and the river runs below. Shortly, after sunrise, the hunting party prepares to leave. There are 3 of them this morning. A French-Canadian trapper named Honoré Duplessis, who has been at the post for 4 years and is the most experienced hunter in the crew. A younger man named William Carpenter, an American from Kentucky, who came west 2 years ago and is still learning. And the older of the post's indigenous trading partners, who has chosen to stay at the post for a few days. A Mandan man named Many Horses, whose real name, translated into English, means something closer to he whose horses run before the wind, but who has been called Many Horses at the post since the first time he came to trade, years before. The Mandan people are extraordinary, and Many Horses is, in his quiet way, a remarkable man. The Mandan were an agricultural nation. Unlike the nomadic hunting peoples of the open plains, they lived in permanent fortified villages along the upper Missouri River, in circular dome-shaped earth lodges that could house 20 or 30 people along with their horses and other valued possessions during the winter. The Mandan grew corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers, and they had been trading agricultural products for meat and hides with the nomadic peoples of the surrounding plains for centuries. The Mandan villages had been important trading centers long before the first Europeans arrived in the region. When Lewis and Clark spent the winter of 1804 to 1805 at a fort near the Mandan villages, they found a sophisticated trading network already in place, with goods moving along the Missouri River Valley in both directions for hundreds of miles. The Mandan were experienced traders, careful, patient, and skilled at assessing value and negotiating favorable terms. Many Horses is 51 years old and has been trading with this post since its establishment. He speaks a serviceable French, learned from Canadian traders decades ago, and enough English to manage basic conversation without the interpreter. He is at the post this week, partly for trade and partly because he enjoys the company of Larocque, with whom he has developed over 7 years, something that is more than a business relationship and might, with a little generosity, be called a friendship. The three hunters ride out through the post's main gate as the sun clears the tree line on the eastern bank of the river. Their horses are in good condition, well fed on the post's reserves of grain and hay, and rested after several days in the stable. Each man carries his rifle, his powder horn and shot bag, his knife, and a length of rope for packing out meat. Duplessis also carries a hatchet, which he finds useful for almost everything. The horses' hooves make a soft, rhythmic sound on the packed earth of the track that leads north from the post, and then a different, quieter sound as they reach the grass of the river bottom. The October morning air is cold and clear, and the horses breathe visible clouds of vapor with each exhalation. The cottonwoods along the river have gone entirely gold, and their leaves fall in slow spirals whenever the breeze touches them, catching the early sunlight and turning it into brief, scattered flickers of gold. The hunters move quietly without speaking. Duplessis has been in this country long enough to move through it with the particular quality of attention that experienced woodspeople develop. Not a tense, watchful attention, but a loose, receptive awareness that takes in everything without effort, noticing changes in bird behavior, reading the soil and grass for recent animal sign, smelling the air for information. The animals they are most likely to encounter are white-tailed deer, which are common in the river-bottom timber, mule deer, which favor the broken country further from the river, and elk, which have been moving through the area in the past 2 weeks, heading south ahead of the season. A bull elk in the fall rut is one of the most spectacular animals in North America. Large as a small horse, with antlers that can span 4 feet or more and weigh 30 pounds, and a voice in rut that carries for miles through the cold autumn air. A high, bugling call that rises and then drops into a series of deep grunts, a sound that the mountain men and plains hunters unanimously agreed was unlike anything else in the natural world. If the hunters are lucky, they might find a cow elk without her calf, the best of all possible outcomes, since a cow elk yields 400 to 600 pounds of meat and has no antlers to deal with. The meat will be processed back at the post, some eaten fresh over the next several days, some dried in long strips over the smoke of a slow fire, some rendered into pemmican by combining it with rendered fat and dried berries. As you drift now, let the sound of hoofbeats on grass carry you a little further towards sleep. The hunters are moving through the golden morning. The river gleams between the cottonwoods. You are warm and still. Jean-Baptiste Beaulieu has been a blacksmith since he was 14 years old, when he was apprenticed to a smith in the town of Trois-Rivières on the St. Lawrence River. He is now 41, and his body carries the evidence of a lifetime at the forge. His shoulders are enormous, his forearms corded with muscle, his face permanently reddened and slightly puckered on, one side where a spark from the forge caught him badly in his 20s. His hearing in his left ear is diminished. The continuous ringing of hammer on iron for 25 years has taken its toll. The blacksmith's shop at a frontier trading post is among the most essential of all its spaces. The iron and steel, goods that hold frontier life together, tools, traps, knives, nails, hinges, chains, barrel hoops, horseshoes, the metal parts of rifles, all require maintenance and repair, and sometimes manufacture from scratch. A blacksmith who could make or fix virtually anything from iron or steel was not merely useful, but vital. Beaulieu's forge is a stone hearth about 4 feet across and 3 feet deep, set at a comfortable working height in the center of the shop. Above it, a stone and clay hood channels the smoke and heat upward through a massive chimney that is visible from outside the palisade walls as a thin column of grey-white smoke that begins rising before any other smoke in the morning and continues. Long after all the others have died down, the fuel is charcoal, wood that has been partially burned in a sealed environment to drive off the water and volatile compounds, leaving nearly pure carbon that burns hotter and cleaner than raw wood. Making charcoal is one of the post's regular tasks, carried out by burning, carefully stacked wood under a covering of earth in the clearing to the west of the post. The bellows that drives air into the fire is made of wood and leather, mounted on a pivot so that it can be worked with one hand while the other manipulates the metal in the fire. The air it drives into the coals raises the temperature of the fire from the 700 or 800 degrees of a normal wood fire to 1500 degrees or more. The temperature at which iron becomes soft and workable, glowing first a dull red, then a bright orange, then a yellow that bleaches toward white at the highest temperatures. Beaulieu has developed, over decades of practice, a sensitivity to the color of heated iron that allows him to judge its temperature to within perhaps 50 degrees without instruments. He knows when iron is ready to work by the precise shade of its glow, and he knows when it is about to be overworked, when the temperature is getting too high and the iron will begin to burn rather than weld. This morning, he is working on a repair to one of the post's steel traps, a number 4 beaver trap whose jaw has been bent out of true by a large animal that apparently stepped on it without triggering it. Beaver traps were expensive by frontier standards. A good steel trap cost $2 or $3 in St. Louis, which was equivalent to a day's wage for a skilled laborer. They were to be maintained, not thrown away. Beaulieu heats the bent jaw in the forge, and when it glows at the right orange temperature, he draws it out with tongs and places it on the anvil, a block of high-quality iron and steel weighing perhaps 200 pounds, mounted on a section of oak trunk set in a pit in the earthen floor of the shop, its working face polished by years of use to a smooth grey gleam. 3 strokes of the hammer, carefully placed, and the jaw is straight again. Back into the fire, back to temperature, and a quick quench in the bucket of water that stands beside the anvil. The hiss of steam, the darkening of the metal from orange to black, the faint smell of hot iron and water. Done. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer is one of the defining sounds of the trading post, as familiar and rhythmic as the sound of the river. It begins each morning after breakfast and continues, with pauses, through the day. Those who have grown up near forges, most of the post's residents in one way or another, find the sound comfortable, almost soporific. It is the sound of things being made and mended, of the post sustaining itself, of the day doing what it is supposed to do. Let the hammer sound fade to a soft, distant rhythm in your mind. Metal on metal, steady and sure. The fire glows in the beer forge. The morning passes. The Missouri River in 1825 is a different river from the Missouri River today, and understanding the difference helps us appreciate what life at the trading post was really like. The modern Missouri has been channelized, its banks straightened and fixed with rock and concrete, its flow controlled by a series of dams, its floodplains drained and plowed. It is a managed, tamed river, redirected in service of navigation and agriculture. The Missouri of 1825 was wild. It was a braided, shifting river that moved across its floodplain in a constant, slow dance, cutting new channels in floods and abandoning old ones in dry years, depositing sandbars and islands in one place and washing them away in another. The water it carried was so loaded with suspended sediment, fine silt from the erosion of the Missouri Plateau and Rocky Mountain highlands it drained, that it ran the color of milky coffee for most of the year, and early explorers who tasted it reported that a cup left standing would deposit a visible layer of fine sediment at the bottom within an hour. This earned it the name Mighty Mo, and in some accounts, the Big Muddy, a name that has stuck. The river's current was strong and swift, anywhere from 3 to 8 miles per hour depending on the season and the stretch. Traveling downstream on the Missouri was easy, a matter of steering rather than propulsion, and a well-built boat could make 100 miles a day going downstream in good conditions. Traveling upstream was another matter entirely. Going against a current of 4 or 5 miles per hour required continuous, exhausting effort. The primary upstream vessel of the Missouri River fur trade in the 1820s was the keelboat. A keelboat was a long, narrow, flat-bottomed boat, anywhere, from 40 to 70 feet in length, with a covered cargo hold amidships and a small deck at each end. It was built light enough to draw only 2 or 3 feet of water, essential on the Missouri, whose navigation was complicated by shifting sandbars and submerged snags, but strongly enough to carry 10 or 15 tons of cargo. Moving a, say, loaded keelboat upstream against the Missouri's current required 4 methods, used in rotation depending on the conditions of the particular stretch being navigated. When the wind was favorable, a sail could be raised. When the bottom was solid, long poles could be used. The crew would plant their poles in the river bottom and walk from bow to stern, pushing the boat upstream with their weight and strength. When the current was too strong for poles, a technique called cordelling was used. A long rope was attached to the mast, and the crew walked along the bank pulling the boat upstream. And when none of these methods was possible, when the banks were too steep or too thick with brush for cordelling, when the water was too deep for poles, the crew would resort to setting and pulling anchors ahead of the boat to winch it, upstream by main force. The men who crewed the keelboats, called voyageurs in the French-Canadian tradition or boatmen in the American, were among the toughest laborers in North America. A cordelling crew on the Missouri might work 14 or 16 hours a day, pulling a fully loaded keelboat upstream against a 4-mile-per-hour current through mud and willow thickets and over rough cobble banks, in heat and cold and rain and wind. They were paid relatively well by frontier standards, fed by the company, and regarded with a mixture of admiration and wariness by settled people who encountered them in the towns along the river. The arrival of a keelboat at the trading post was an event. The boats arrived once a year, in spring or early summer, bearing the supplies that would sustain the post through the coming year. The unpacking and storing of the keelboat's cargo occupied the post's entire crew for several days and was accompanied by a festive atmosphere, new goods, news from the settlements, perhaps letters from family, and the general sense of connection to a larger world that the winter's isolation had made feel distant. The keelboat that departed the post, loaded with the year's fur harvest, was another kind of milestone. The moment when the work of the year was consigned to the river and the market, when the success or failure of 12 months' effort would finally be measured against the ledger of supply and demand in the distant cities of the east. But this morning, the river below the post is quiet. No keelboat is expected until spring. A single dugout canoe is tied at the post's river landing, a large cottonwood dugout that belongs to many horses and his companions, who paddled downstream from their village 3 days ago. The river runs brown and swift past the landing, carrying leaves and the occasional floating branch downstream with a soft, continuous sound that has been the background music of the post since the day it was built. The sound of the river. Let that sound fill your mind now. That soft, continuous, unhurried sound of water moving over sand and around obstacles, always the same and always different. Let it carry you. The arrival of the trading party is announced first by the dogs. Baton rises from his position in the sun near the kitchen door, sets his feet wide, and gives 3 sharp, resonant barks that bring the watchman on the palisade wall to attention. The watchman, young Baptiste Gagnon, who finished his night, watched several hours ago and is doing double duty today, looks out through the observation gap in the wall and calls down to the courtyard. Visitors coming. Looks like Lakota. 8 riders. Larocque is already moving toward the gate, adjusting his coat, settling his expression into the particular composed attentiveness that years of frontier diplomacy have taught him. Jacques Bellefeuille, appearing as if from nowhere, falls into step beside him. The party that rides up to the post gate is indeed Lakota. 8 men and 2 women, leading several pack horses loaded with rolled bundles that are clearly furs. The leader is a man in his mid-40s named Charging Elk, whom Larocque knows from previous trading seasons. He is a dignified, careful man with whom Larocque has always managed to do business smoothly, and his presence at the front of the party is a good sign. The Lakota people, also called the Teton Sioux, were the largest and most powerful of the Sioux-speaking nations in the early 19th century, and they dominated a vast territory stretching from the Missouri River west into the Black Hills and the northern plains. They had acquired horses via trade networks from the southwest sometime in the early 18th century, and the horse had transformed them from semi-sedentary farmers into one of the most formidable equestrian hunting peoples on the continent. In 1825, the Lakota are at the height of their power and confidence. They control access to much of the finest bison hunting country on the northern plains, and they are skilled and aggressive diplomats who negotiate their trading relationships with the European and American posts from a position of real strength. They do not need to trade with Larocque's post. There are other posts, other options. They trade here because they choose to, because the terms have historically been acceptable, and because a relationship with a supply of manufactured goods, particularly gunpowder, lead, and steel, has proven useful. The protocols of greeting between Larocque and Charging Elk are careful and extensive, and they follow a pattern that has been established over many previous meetings. Larocque offers the standard welcome, an invitation into the post, a gesture toward the trading room, a formal expression of pleasure at seeing old friends. Charging Elk responds with equivalent formality, inquiring after the health of the post's people, commenting on the state of the season. This exchange, conducted through Jacques' translation, takes several minutes and is not, despite its length, mere politeness. It is the establishment of a tone, a demonstration of mutual respect, a clearing of the ground before the actual business begins. Inside the trading room, Charging Elk and two of his companions inspect the goods on offer. This inspection is thorough and unhurried. The blankets are unfolded and examined for quality, their weight tested, the tightness of the weave checked by holding them to the light. The knives are taken from their paper wrapping and tested for balance and sharpness. The Stroud cloth is held up and its color assessed. The glass beads are sifted through fingers, their quality evaluated by criteria that the traders have developed over generations. This is not window shopping or idle curiosity. The Lakota traders are experts in the quality of manufactured goods, having been evaluating them for generations. They know the difference between a good Hudson's Bay blanket and a cheaper imitation. They know which knives hold their edges and which are made of inferior steel. They know which Stroud cloth has been adulterated with inferior wool and which is the genuine article from the English mills. Their assessment is professional and demanding, and Larocque respects it. He would be more concerned if they simply accepted everything without examination. The negotiation that follows is long and has its own rhythm and structure. The Lakota traders present their furs, bison robes primarily, 23 prime cow robes, well-tanned and pliable, some smaller furs including 6 otter pelts and a dozen beaver plumes, and a particularly fine wolf skin that is displayed, with some pride since wolf was both difficult to trap and considerably less common than other furs. Thomas Harrington examines each pelt, grades it, and enters it in his ledger, calling out the values in French that Jacques translates into Lakota. Then come the Lakota's requests for specific trade goods, blankets in specific colors and sizes, a particular style of knife, a quantity of gunpowder and lead, a bolt of the red Stroud cloth, and a set of brass kettles. Larocque considers each request against his inventory, against the current exchange rates, and against the longer calculus of the ongoing relationship. The value of maintaining Charging Elk's goodwill, the importance of the Lakota as trading partners, the risk of either being too generous or too tight-fisted. Eventually, after several rounds of offer and counter-offer, the exchange rates are agreed. The goods are measured, counted, and set aside. The furs are bundled and moved to the warehouse. Tea is brought from the kitchen. Larocque serves tea at the conclusion of trading sessions as a matter of routine, having found that it creates a comfortable space for the informal conversation that often follows, and that is, in its own way, as valuable as the formal trading itself. Rest in the trading room now. The tea is warm, the goods are arranged, the conversation flows gently around, you in 2 languages. The October light falls through the small windows in golden bars. Everything is as it should be. After the trading session concludes and the visiting party has made camp outside the palisade for the night, Harrington and 2 of the engagés spend the afternoon in the warehouse, processing the newly acquired furs. The warehouse is a long, low building with thick log walls and a packed earth floor. It smells strongly of animal, a dense, complex, not entirely unpleasant smell of dried hide and tallow and the faint muskiness of beaver castoreum and the sharper note of wolf. This smell is the smell of the fur trade's product, concentrated. Processing the furs means several things. Each pelt must be examined and graded, assigned a quality rating that will be used to determine its value on the eventual market. It must be sorted by species and quality. It must be inspected for damage, moth damage, rot, improper stretching, and any damaged pelts must be noted separately, and then the pelts must be pressed into bales for storage and eventual transport. The pressing of fur bales was one of the physical labors of the post that required a device called a fur press, essentially a large wooden screw press, similar in principle to the wine and olive presses of the Mediterranean, that could compress a large pile of loose furs into a compact, dense bale. The pressed bale would be wrapped in canvas and bound with rawhide thongs, and in this form it could survive the long journey downstream by keelboat without the furs shifting or being damaged. Beaver plues were the most carefully handled of all. The furs because they commanded the highest price and because their quality could be degraded by improper storage. A prime beaver pelt, properly dried and pressed, could survive months of storage in a well-maintained warehouse without significant deterioration. An improperly stored pelt could develop mold, lose its underfur, or be damaged by insects, all of which would reduce its value considerably. The other furs each had their own particular requirements. Bison robes, being the largest and heaviest, took up the most space and required the most careful folding. Otter pelts, which were long and narrow, were folded in a particular way that preserved the tail and the arrangement of the guard hairs. Mink and muskrat, which were small, were bundled in dozens and tied with twine. As Harrington works through the afternoon pile, he counts, grades, and records. His ledger fills with numbers, quantity, species, grade, value, a detailed accounting of the afternoon's receipts. He is good at this work, and he knows it, which gives him a quiet satisfaction that is not quite pride, but something adjacent to it. The total value of a year's fur harvest at a post like this one, counting all species across all trading sessions, might be anywhere from $3,000 to $15,000 at St. Louis prices, depending on the productivity of the season, the health of the market, and the skill of the bourgeois in building and maintaining trading relationships. From this revenue, the company would subtract the cost of the trade goods, the cost of the keelboat freight, the wages of the post's employees, and the cost of the post's supplies. What remained was profit. Let the warehouse settle into quiet around you. The smell of the furs, the rustle of pressed hides, the scratch of Harrington's pen on paper. The afternoon light has softened. The day is past its middle. In his forge, Jean-Baptiste Beaulieu is working on a project he has been looking forward to all week, the making of a new knife from raw iron bar stock for many horses. This is not an ordinary request. Many horses had brought the bourgeois a piece of iron, a small bar of good quality wrought iron obtained from somewhere, perhaps from a previous trading visit to a different post, and had asked in the careful way of a man who wants something, done well if Beaulieu could make him a knife of a particular design. He had described the design in some detail to Jacques, who had translated it for Beaulieu, a blade of approximately 9 inches, tapering to a sharp point with a single edge, ground to a fine bevel, and the back left thick for strength. The handle should be of staghorn if Beaulieu had it, or of elk antler if not. The balance should be toward the blade rather than the handle. This is the kind of commission that Beaulieu genuinely enjoys. Making a knife from raw stock is an exercise in all the core skills of blacksmithing: heating, forming, drawing out, tempering, grinding, finishing. It is work that requires judgment and feel as much as technique. He begins with the iron bar in the forge, bringing it up to a forge welding. Heat, the temperature at which iron becomes almost plastic, glowing a brilliant yellow-white. He draws it out with hammer and tongs, working it on the anvil into the rough shape of the blade. Thick at the spine, tapering toward the edge, drawn to a point at the tip. The work requires perhaps 24 heats, each one bringing the blade closer to its intended shape, each one requiring Beaulieu to work quickly before the metal cools below working temperature and becomes too hard to shape. The steel of the blade's edge is added through a technique called forge welding. A piece of high-carbon steel, obtained from a worn-out file, is welded to the blade's edge while both pieces are at near-white heat, beaten together until the metal, atoms of the two pieces intermingle and they become one. This bimetallic construction gives the blade the best qualities of both materials. the toughness and flexibility of wrought iron in the body of the blade, and the hardness and edge-holding ability of high-carbon steel along the cutting edge. The tempering process, heating the finished ground blade to a specific temperature and then quenching it rapidly in oil or water, is the most critical and most art-dependent step of all. Too high a temperature or too fast a quench, and the blade will be brittle and snap under lateral stress. Too low a temperature, and the edge will be soft and fail to hold a keen edge. The right temperature is indicated, to voyageurs practiced, by a specific color, a deep purple at the edge, shading to a medium blue along the body of the blade. He quenches it in a bucket of linseed oil, not water, which is too fast and too harsh for a thick blade, and holds it up to examine. It has taken the temper correctly. He tests it with a file. The edge resists the file, meaning the steel has hardened as intended. The grinding and polishing that follow, done on a water-cooled stone wheel and then by hand with progressively finer stones, take most of the afternoon. When it is done, the blade gleams with a fine, slightly matte finish along the flats and a polished mirror-bright edge. The staghorn handle, carved from a piece of antler that Beaulieu had been keeping, for a good commission, is fitted with iron pins and sealed with pine tar. It is a good knife. Better, perhaps, than the knife many horses had described wanting. Beaulieu, once he is in the work, tends to exceed the request. He holds it balanced on one finger, at the point he judged would be the correct balance. It rests perfectly, blade side, down, exactly where he intended. He wraps it in a piece of oiled cloth and sets it on the shelf above his workbench, where it will wait until morning. Then he dampers the forge and begins to clean the shop. Feel the comfortable tiredness of good work done, the forge cooling, the floor swept, the tools hung back in their places, the afternoon moving toward evening. Let your body feel that same satisfaction, that same readiness for rest. As the afternoon fades toward evening and the post begins to quiet, Larocque sits in his office again, reviewing the day's accounts. The numbers in his ledger represent a complex web of value and exchange that connects this remote Missouri River post to the counting houses of New York, the workshops of Sheffield and Manchester, the warehouses of Rotterdam and Liverpool, and ultimately to the hat shops of London and Paris, where the final product, the fashionable beaver felt hat, was sold to the gentlemen of Europe. Let us trace that web for a moment, slowly and carefully, because it is one of the fascinating threads of the fur trade story. The beaver pelt that arrived at the trading room this morning, traded from a Lakota hunter for a wool blanket and a knife, will follow a long and specific journey. From the post's warehouse, it will travel by Keelboat to St. Louis, a journey of perhaps 3 weeks on the current of the Missouri and Mississippi. In St. Louis, it will be sold at auction or on contract to one of the major fur companies who will sort and grade it and prepare it for export. It will then travel by river to New Orleans, by ship to Liverpool, by canal or road to the wool towns of Yorkshire or the hat-making centres of Danbury, Connecticut or Paris. In the hat-making trade, the beaver pelt's value lay not in the long, guard hairs that gave the fur its visible surface, but in the shorter, denser underfur, the duvet that lay beneath. The guard hairs were combed away and discarded. The underfur was separated, cleaned, and subjected to a process called carroting, in which it was treated with an orange-colored solution of mercury compounds that roughened the microscopic surface of the fibers and made them mat together more readily. This matting property, the tendency of the treated fibers to interlock and fuse under heat, moisture, and pressure, is what made beaver fur the ideal raw material for felt. The hat makers would spread the treated fur on a flat surface, apply water and heat, and work it with their hands and tools until it formed a dense, felted sheet that could be shaped over a mold into the crown and brim of a hat. The resulting felt was waterproof, rigid, and durable, qualities that made the beaver felt hat the dominant headgear of fashionable Europe for more than a century. The mercury compounds used in the carroting process were, as we now know, neurotoxic. The hat makers who breathed the fumes and handled the treated fur over the course of their careers suffered cumulative mercury poisoning, which caused tremors, mood swings, hallucinations, and cognitive decline. The expression "mad as a hatter," familiar from Alice in Wonderland and its source in common parlance, referred to this occupational disease, which was recognized in the trade but not understood as being caused by the mercury until much later in the 19th century. The beaver pelt would ultimately contribute perhaps 200 or 300 individual fibers to a single hat, mixed with the fibers of other pelts. A finished hat might incorporate the underfur of dozens of individual beavers, contributed from pelts acquired at dozens of trading posts across thousands of miles of wilderness. The man who eventually bought that hat, a merchant in London, or a lawyer in Paris, paying perhaps £1 for a good beaver felt, had no knowledge of the Missouri River trading post, the Lakota hunter, or the work of Larocque and his crew. The distance between the wilderness and the city in the early 19th century was not just geographical but cognitive. The two worlds barely knew each other existed, and yet they were connected. The price of beaver felt hats in London ultimately determined how much a beaver pelt was worth at Larocque's trading window, which ultimately determined how much time and effort the Lakota hunter invested in trapping, which ultimately determined how the beaver populations of the Missouri Basin fared over the coming decades. These connections, long, indirect, consequential, are invisible in the daily experience of any one person in the chain, but they are as real as the river below the bluff. Let your mind float on these connections now, these long, invisible threads that tied a London haberdasher to a Missouri River beaver with a Lakota hunter and a French-Canadian bourgeois in between. The world has always been more connected than it seems from where we stand. Let that thought settle gently. Let it drift. You don't need to hold it. As the sun drops behind the western hills and the October evening chill settles into the courtyard, the smell from Marie Anne's kitchen intensifies and changes. The background note of the all-day bean soup is joined now by the smell of fresh cooked meat, because the hunters returned at midday with a large mule deer and 2 wild turkeys, and the deer haunches have been roasting on a spit over the kitchen's main fire since early afternoon. The evening meal is the social center of the post's day. At the long table in the mess hall, a room adjoining the kitchen that can seat 20 people, the post's residents gather and eat together, and the conversation that flows during and after the meal is the post's primary means of exchanging information, maintaining relationships, and processing the events of the day. Frontier cooking in the early 19th century has a reputation, not entirely deserved, for grimness. And it is true that the staples were simple and the range of ingredients limited. But the men and women who cooked for frontier crews were working within their constraints with skill and ingenuity, and a well-run post's table was not grim at all. Marie Anne's roast deer, seasoned with dried herbs and basted with its own rendered fat, is excellent. The bean soup, which has been simmering for 8 hours, is rich and deeply flavored. The corn pone, baked in a Dutch oven that morning and kept warm near the fire, is dense and substantial. There is, for dessert, a pot of dried applesauce, sweetened with molasses, which is perhaps not a luxurious pudding, but which everyone at the table has been looking forward to all day. The wild turkey deserves special mention. The eastern wild turkey, Meleagris galopavo, is one of the great success stories of American wildlife, having recovered from near extinction in the 20th century to a current population of about 7 million birds. But in the early 19th century, wild turkeys were abundant from the Atlantic coast to the Missouri River and beyond, and they were a staple of the frontier table. They were different from the domestic turkeys we know today. Leaner, darker fleshed, with a richer, stronger flavor, and with legs so muscular from a lifetime of walking that they required long, slow cooking to become tender. The post's wild turkeys will be stewed tomorrow with whatever vegetables can be found in the garden into a thick soup that will serve as the midday meal. After the meal, the table is cleared and conversation continues. Larocque and Charging Elk, with Jacques translating, talk about the fall hunting season, which areas have been productive, where the bison have moved, what the winter is expected to bring. Charging Elk mentions carefully that there has been some tension to the north between a Lakota band and a Chippewa trading party, information that is both intelligence for Larocque and a subtle communication about the Lakotas' own current concerns. Larocque receives this information with equal care, neither pressing for detail nor appearing uninterested. At the other end of the table, the younger men are talking about other things. Horses, a hunting incident that Duplessis is recounting. With gestures and mock horror, a card game that is apparently planned for later in the evening. William Carpenter, the young Kentuckian, is sitting beside many horses and attempting, with considerable help from Jacques' nearby ear, to communicate something in a mixture of hand signs and approximately pronounced Lakota words. Many horses. Is patient and amused. The evening meal is the fur trade's answer to the formal dinner of the eastern cities, the moment when the day's work is set aside and the social bonds that hold the community together are reinforced over food. It is unpolished and democratic. Nobody changes their clothes for it or stands on ceremony. But it performs the same essential function that elaborate formal dinners performed in Philadelphia or London or Paris. It makes the people around the table for an hour or two a community rather than a collection of individuals. Feel yourself at the long table now, in the warm light of the fire, with the food and the conversation and the comfortable tiredness of a full day. Let the voices wash over you soft and warm. You don't need to follow the words. Just the warmth of company, the smell of food, the flickering light. After the meal, while the others are at their card game or their evening tasks, Larocque sits again in his office and writes his weekly letter. A letter that will not be delivered until the spring keelboat arrives, but that he writes as a matter of discipline and habit, as a way of organizing his thoughts and maintaining his connection to the larger world. In this letter, addressed to the company's factor in St. Louis, he describes the day's trading, notes the condition of his inventory, and reports on the intelligence he has gathered from charging elk about the state of the beaver populations to the north and west. This reporting function, which seems purely commercial but is actually much broader, is one of the underappreciated contributions of the trading post system to the larger project of understanding the continent. The bourgeois of a trading post who did his job well was not just a shopkeeper and accountant. He was an information gatherer and synthesizer, accumulating over years of careful listening a detailed understanding of a vast territory that he could never personally travel through. The indigenous traders who came to the post brought information, with them as naturally as they brought furs. They reported on game conditions, on weather, on the movements of other tribes and the state of intertribal relations, on geographical features they had seen on their travels, on unusual events or observations. Over a career of 20 years, a skilled bourgeois would accumulate from these reports a picture of the surrounding country that was in many respects more detailed and more current than anything available in any official survey. The trading post was, in a sense, a node in a vast information network that spanned the entire western interior of the continent. The Hudson's Bay Company understood this and exploited it systematically, requiring its factors to submit regular reports on everything, from weather and game conditions to the health and attitudes of the indigenous nations in their trading areas. These reports, accumulated over decades and preserved in the company's archives in London, constitute an extraordinary historical record, one that historians are still mining for information about the pre-settlement West. The trading post also functioned as a kind of cultural meeting point, a place where different value systems, different ways of understanding the world, different aesthetic sensibilities, and different practical knowledge bases came into regular contact. The Lakota hunter, who examined the Sheffield knives in the trading room, was bringing to that examination a knowledge of edge tools, derived from generations of making and using stone and bone tools, that was in certain respects deeper and more sophisticated than the knowledge of the Sheffield cutler who had made them. The French-Canadian engagé who admired the quality of a bison robe was recognizing, even if he couldn't articulate it, that the indigenous tanning techniques represented an accumulated knowledge of material processing that the industrial world had not yet replicated. These cross-cultural recognitions and exchanges, occurring daily in both directions, across the trading room counter and the dinner table and the evening fire, were not systematic or ideologically motivated. They were just the inevitable result of competent people from different traditions spending time together in close quarters, engaging in a common project of survival and commerce, and they produced, over time, a distinctive culture of the frontier, neither purely European nor purely indigenous, but something genuinely new. Let your mind drift among these ideas, gently and without holding on. The meeting of worlds, the exchange of things and knowledge, the long, slow accumulation of understanding. Like water finding its level in connected vessels, knowledge flowing from where it was held to where it was needed. After the card game, which Duplessis wins, as he usually does, with a placid expression that everyone at the table knows conceals a sharp and calculating mind, the men gather around the larger fireplace in the mess hall for the evening's final hour before sleep. This is the storytelling hour. It is not an organized event, not a scheduled performance. It simply happens, as it happens most evenings, emerging naturally from the particular combination of physical tiredness, full stomachs, and the darkness outside that creates a readiness for narrative. The storytelling culture of the frontier was rich and elaborate, combining elements from several different traditions. The French-Canadian voyageurs and coureurs des bois had brought with them a tradition of contes, folk tales and legends from the rural Quebec countryside, many of them centuries old, featuring supernatural beings called the loup-garou, werewolf, the feu follet, will-o'-the-wisp, and the chasse gallery, a legend about a flying canoe that carried voyageurs magically through the air to visit their sweethearts in Quebec on New Year's Eve, at the price of a deal with the devil. These stories were told in French, and even those who spoke only English could follow the general drift from the gestures and the dramatic changes in the storyteller's voice. The American frontier had its own tradition of tall tales, wildly. Exaggerated stories of feats of strength and endurance, encounters with enormous or supernatural animals, weather events of impossible scale. These stories were told straight-faced, with complete apparent seriousness, and part of their pleasure lay in the question of how long the teller could maintain the performance before the audience's laughter broke through. Tonight's primary storyteller is Duplessis, who has a gift for the form. He tells a story, partly true, partly embellished, the line between the two known only to him, about a winter 3 years ago when he was camped in a canyon north of here, and a bear came into his camp in the night and ate most of his food supply. The bear, in the telling, grows progressively larger and more improbable as the story goes on, until by the end, it is an animal of almost mythological dimensions, its footprints as large as a man's torso, its breath visible from 50 yards in, the cold air. The audience knows the story is embellished. They don't care. The embellishment is the point. It is the craft of the thing, the pleasure of watching a good storyteller turn a modest experience into something that fills the room. Many horses, following through Jacques' occasional whispered translation, asks a question at the end of the bear story. Did the bear eat Duplessis's rifle? Duplessis says he did not. Then perhaps, says Many Horses, Duplessis is lucky to be alive and perhaps should not have made the bear quite so large. The room laughs. Duplessis grins. Many Horses looks pleased with his contribution. The Lakota oral tradition is one of the richest in North America, encompassing thousands of years of accumulated stories, ceremonies, and teachings. Many of the most important stories are sacred, and not to be told in mixed company or out of season. There are stories that belong to winter, when the snakes are under the ground and cannot hear them, and stories that belong to summer, and stories that belong to particular ceremonies and may not be told outside of them. But there are also everyday stories, coyote stories, hunting stories, stories of cleverness and foolishness that are the entertainment of the evening fire in any culture. And these, tonight, Many Horses shares one of, and Jacques translates, and the room is quiet and appreciative. The story involves Coyote, who is a trickster figure in many Native American traditions, not purely good or purely bad, not really animal or really human, but something in between, a figure who gets into trouble by wanting too much and gets out of it by wanting at exactly the right moment. The story is funny, and its punchline, which involves Coyote being embarrassed by his own cleverness, lands well even in translation. After the stories, the fire is banked and the men begin to drift toward the barracks. The post settles into the particular quality of nighttime quiet that is different from daytime quiet. Deeper, more complete, more full of the river sound and the wind in the palisade stakes and the small night sounds of the horses and the dog. You are drifting now. The fire is low. the stories have been told. The night is full and quiet around the post. Baptiste Gagnon takes his position on the palisade walk for the first watch of the night. He wraps his coat tighter against the October cold and looks out over the dark landscape beyond the post's walls. The sky is extraordinary. Without any artificial light for hundreds of miles, the stars are not the scattered, pale suggestions visible from any modern city, but a dense, complex, blazing mass of light. The Milky Way a solid band of luminescence from horizon to horizon, the individual stars ranging from the faint and nearly invisible to the brilliant planets hanging in the gay. South and west, the Lakota camp outside the palisade is a dark cluster of shapes with two small fires glowing at its edges, and the river below is a faint gleam of reflected starlight in the darkness. The sky that Baptiste sees tonight is the same sky that existed before any human being walked this land. The same stars, the same patterns, the same slow wheel of the cosmos turning through its nightly arc. The Lakota, the Mandan, the Crow, the Cheyenne, and all the peoples who had lived on this land for thousands of years before the fur traders arrived had watched this same sky and made sense of it in their own ways, naming the stars, reading the seasons in their movements, using them for navigation and for the keeping of time and the structuring of ceremony. The Lakota called the Milky Way the Wanagi Takanku, the Road of Souls, believing it to be the path traveled by the spirits of the dead on their journey to the afterlife. The Pleiades, the small, tight cluster of stars visible in the east on October evenings, were called the Seven Little Girls and had their own stories. The Big Dipper, which the Lakota called the Dried Willow, was a navigation tool and a season marker, its position relative to the North Star changing predictably through the year. European and American astronomy of 1825 was in the process of its own extraordinary expansion. The great William Herschel had died in 1822, leaving behind a catalogue of thousands of deep sky objects, the nebulae and star clusters that his enormous telescopes had revealed to be far more numerous and various than anyone had previously suspected. His son, John Herschel, was continuing his work, extending the survey to the southern hemisphere. The science of understanding the scale and structure of the universe was barely beginning, and the sky that Baptiste watched tonight was, even to the best educated astronomers of the day, only partially understood. What everyone could agree on, the Lakota elder who understood the stars as Road of Souls, the American astronomer who understood them as distant suns, and Baptiste Gagnon, who understood them primarily as navigation aids, was that the night sky was astonishing. That no amount of familiarity with it entirely diminished the sense of scale and mystery that came from looking up into it on a clear October night in a place where no artificial light competed with it. Baptiste makes his circuit of the palisade, walk, 4 sides of the square, pausing at each corner to look and listen in all directions. Nothing. The horses are quiet. The Lakota camp is quiet. The river murmurs. An owl calls once, somewhere in the cottonwoods below the bluff, and is answered, after a long pause, by another owl further away. Let the owl calls settle into your mind like stones settling to the bottom of a still pool. The night is wide and dark and full of stars. The post sleeps. The river runs. The world goes on in its quiet, patient way, turning slowly under the stars, carrying all its sleeping people gently through the hours of the night. In the darkness of the warehouse, the pressed bales of fur wait in their quiet rows for spring and the long journey downstream. Let us think about them for a moment, about the animals they came from and the world those animals inhabited. The North American. Beaver, Castor canadensis, is, as we noted in a previous story, the largest rodent native to this continent. But its significance in the ecology of the Missouri River watershed goes far beyond its size or its commercial value. The beaver is what ecologists call a keystone species, an animal whose presence in an ecosystem has effects disproportionate to its numbers, shaping the environment in ways that affect hundreds of other species. The beaver's primary ecological contribution is the construction and maintenance of dams. a beaver dam is an extraordinary piece of natural engineering. The animal begins by cutting poles, branches, and small tree trunks of 2 to 4 inches in diameter, felled with those remarkable self-sharpening orange incisors and dragged or floated to the building site. These poles are placed across the stream, anchored against the current by the weight of stones, mud, and vegetation that the beaver packs around and over them. Over time, the dam grows, typically a few feet high, and anywhere from a few yards to hundreds of yards long, depending on the width of the stream being dammed. The pond that forms behind the dam is not just a home for the beaver family that built it. It is a habitat for dozens of other species. The still, deep water supports aquatic plants that cannot survive in the fast current of an undammed stream. These plants attract and feed waterfowl, amphibians, fish, and the insects that birds and fish feed on. The pond edges and the meadows that develop on the sites of old drained beaver ponds, called beaver meadows, are among the most biologically productive habitats in the Rocky Mountain and Great Plains ecosystems. The beaver's tree cutting also shapes the forest. By removing trees from the stream edges, beavers allow sunlight to reach the water, warming it and supporting the growth of aquatic vegetation. The fallen trees they don't use for their dams provide habitat for cavity-nesting birds and other wildlife. The stumps they leave regrow as shrubby willows and alders that are among the most important shrub species for browsing animals like deer and elk. When the beaver population of a watershed was reduced by trapping, as it was dramatically, during the fur trade era, the ecological effects radiated outward from the streams in all directions. The dams fell into disrepair and eventually washed out, draining the ponds. The beaver meadows dried up. The seasonal floods that the ponds had previously moderated became sharper and more destructive. The water table dropped. Species that had depended on the beaver pond habitat declined. In a very real sense, the decline of the Rocky Mountain beaver in the fur trade era was an early example of what we now call a trophic cascade, a chain of ecological effects triggered by the removal of a key species from a food web and habitat. The mountain men who noted, in the 1830s, that the streams seemed less productive, the game less numerous, the grass in certain valleys less lush than it had been, were observing the early stages of this cascade without having any conceptual framework for understanding what they were seeing. The modern restoration of beaver populations to many western streams, a conservation strategy now widely practiced, has demonstrated in reverse what the fur trade demonstrated in forward. When beaver return to a watershed, the dams go back up, the ponds return, the meadows develop, and the biological richness of the entire system increases dramatically. A single beaver family can transform a degraded stream stretch into a productive wetland within a few years. The bales in the warehouse tonight represent perhaps 200 beaver lives. Each one was a keystone removed from a small piece of landscape. The landscape noticed, in its slow, patient, ecological way. Let that thought rest softly in your mind, the long connections. The deep time of rivers and animals and water, the night flowing around the sleeping post. Rest now. It is the middle of the night now. The post is entirely quiet. The fire in the mess hall has burned to coals. The fire in Larocque's office has done the same. In the barracks, the men sleep in their bunks under their wool blankets, their breathing deep and regular in the cold darkness. In her small house near the north wall, Félicité sleeps between her parents, one small fist curled under her cheek, dreaming whatever 5-year-olds dream on October nights in the wilderness. In the warehouse, the firs lie pressed and still, smelling of their origins, the cold rivers, the forest edge, the open plain. In the stable, the horses stand in their warm, hay-smelling darkness, some sleeping standing up as horses do, their lower lips slightly slack, their breathing slow and deep. In the Lakota camp outside the walls, Charging Elk sits briefly awake, as he often does in the middle of the night, listening to the river and the wind and the particular silence of the camp around him. He is thinking about the conversation with Larocque, the intelligence he shared, the intelligence he received, the terms of the trade, the trajectory of the relationship. He is, in his own way, doing the same work that Larocque does at his account books, assessing, planning, calibrating. Then he lies down and is asleep again within minutes. The watchman on the palisade walk has been replaced by the second watchman, a quiet, solidly built French-Canadian named René, who has been doing this night watch for 3 years and who has achieved, through the combination of genuine vigilance and deep familiarity with the sounds of the place, a state that is not quite asleep, but is comfortable and restful despite the cold. He has learned to tell the difference between the sounds that require attention and the sounds that do not, and to let the latter pass through his awareness without disturbing the former. The river runs. The stars wheel slowly overhead. Orion, rising now in the east, the hunter tilting toward the horizon, his belt a perfect diagonal line of 3 bright stars. The cottonwoods along the river whisper in the small wind that comes before dawn, a sound like many pages being turned at once. This is the deepest hour, the hour when the body rests most completely, when the mind is most fully in the country of sleep, when the boundary between the self and the surrounding darkness is at its thinnest. You have been in this place all evening, drifting through the hours of a day at the trading post. You have sat in the warm kitchen and eaten the morning porridge. You have watched the trading room fill with color and the smell of goods. You have heard the hammer ring from the blacksmith's forge, and the voices from the evening table and the stories told around the fire. You have looked up at the stars from the palisade walk, and now the night has reached its deepest point, and you are very nearly gone into that soft, dark country where the body heals and the mind reorganizes itself in ways we don't fully understand, where the day's impressions are filed and integrated and transformed into memory and understanding. Let yourself go there now. The post is safe. The river runs. The stars are turning slowly toward morning. As you drift, let a few more images drift with you. Images of the natural world that surrounded the post and sustained it. The cottonwood tree, Populus deltoides, was the most important tree of the Missouri River Valley and the most visible. Its particular color in October is a deep, saturated gold, not the yellower gold of aspen, not the paler gold of willow, but a rich, warm, almost orange-tinted gold that catches the low autumn sun and seems to glow from within. The cottonwood's leaves are roughly triangular. The deltoids of its scientific name refers to the delta shape, and they are attached to their branches by flattened petioles that allow them to flutter and shimmer in the slightest breeze, giving the cottonwood groves their characteristic restless liquid movement. The cottonwood provided the post with more than beauty. Its soft, easily worked wood was used for the dugout canoes that served as the trading post's small watercraft. Its inner bark, the cambium layer just beneath the outer bark, was edible and nutritious, and served both as a supplementary food for the horses and, in emergencies, as a food source for humans. Its catkins, appearing in early spring before any other plant, were among the first foods available after the long winter and were eaten by geese, ducks, and various other birds. Its seeds, carried on white cottony fluff that gave the tree its name, were among the most effective dispersal mechanisms in the plant world. A single mature cottonwood, in a good year, produced millions of seeds, capable of traveling for miles on the wind and establishing wherever they landed in moist, bare soil. The grasses of the river bottom and the upland prairie were the foundation of the ecosystem that the post and its trading networks depended on. The dominant grass of the northern Great Plains in 1825 was not a single species, but a complex community. Big bluestem and little bluestem on the moister bottomlands, western wheatgrass and buffalo grass on the drier uplands, side oats grama on the rocky slopes, and dozens of other species filling the niches between. These grasses had co-evolved with the bison over millions of years, and they were extraordinarily well adapted to the grazing regime of vast herds. They grew from the base rather than the tip, so that grazing removed the leaf while leaving the growing point intact. Their roots extended to depths of 6 feet or more, building an enormous underground biomass that could survive drought, fire, and the passage of millions of hooves. After a fire, and the plains burned frequently, ignited by lightning or by indigenous peoples managing the landscape, the grass came back within weeks, green and vigorous, a pasture renewed. The soil that these grasses had built over thousands of years was among the most fertile in the world. The combination of grass growth, grazing, decomposition, and fire had created a topsoil of extraordinary depth and richness, sometimes as deep as 6 feet in the best prairie lands. This soil would eventually, when the prairie was plowed and planted, make the Great Plains the breadbasket of the world. But in 1825, it was covered with grass and bison and the bones of all the bison that had grazed it before, slowly being returned to the mineral cycle of the living earth. Let the grasses move in the wind of your mind, softly and endlessly, wave after wave of movement across the wide plain. The gold and silver of autumn grass. The sound of wind in grass, which is one of the most peaceful sounds in the world. Let it carry you. The sky in the east is lightening. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in the slow, inevitable way that dawn always comes in autumn in the middle continent. A gradual brightening from absolute darkness to a deep blue, from deep blue to a paler blue, from pale blue to a thin, cold gold along the horizon that spreads and deepens as the minutes pass. The first birds begin to call. A song sparrow in the willow thicket below the bluff. A crow somewhere to the north. The soft, three-note call of a white-throated sparrow that has stopped on its migration south and is resting in the cottonwoods. These birds mark the transition between the night world and the day world with their voices, as birds have done every morning since before any human being walked on this continent, as they will continue to do long after the trading post and everything associated with it is gone. In the stable, Delorme is already moving quietly between the horses, beginning the morning feeding. The horses' breath rises in visible clouds in the cold air. Their hooves shift on the earthen floor with a comfortable, familiar sound. In the kitchen, Marie-Anne is building the morning fire. She kneels before the fireplace, arranges the tinder and kindling she set ready the night before, and strikes. A spark with her flint and steel. The fire catches. She adds a piece of split pine and then a larger piece of oak. By the time the water in the pot begins to steam, the kitchen is warm, and the smell of the burning wood has joined the smell of the river and the grass to make the particular compound smell of morning at the post. In his bed, Larocque lies for a few minutes in the almost wakefulness that precedes real waking, aware of the sounds around him, the stable, the kitchen fire, the river, and not yet obligated to do anything about them. This is the best moment of his day, the brief interval between sleep and the beginning of the day's responsibilities, when the post is functioning around him and nothing requires his immediate attention and he can simply exist in it, aware and comfortable for a minute or two. Then he rises. The day begins again. It will be much like yesterday, the accounts, the trading room, the hunters and the blacksmith and the cook and the interpreter. The river below the bluff will run as it always runs, brown and swift and indifferent. The mountains far to the west will be exactly where they have always been. The stars will return tonight, the same stars, wheeling in the same slow arc, as they have done every night since the world began. And around all of this, the post and its people, the river and its beavers, the plains and their bison and their grass, the mountains and their passes and their extraordinary sky. Time will move in its patient, inexorable way, carrying everything forward into a future that none of the people at this post can see, toward a world they cannot imagine. The trading post will not last. In 20 years, the beaver will be largely trapped out, and the fur trade will have collapsed, and the post will be abandoned or converted into something else. The keelboats will give way to steamboats, and the steamboats to railroads. The bison will be gone from this stretch of the Missouri within 50 years, shot out of existence by hunters whose bullets and whose market were things that no one standing in this courtyard in 1825 could have foreseen. The Lakota and the Mandan and the Crow will find their world transformed, reduced, constrained by the force of a westward movement that was already gathering speed on the other side of the Mississippi. But that is later. Right now, it is October of 1825, and the morning is cold and clear and full of the smell of frost and wood smoke and river, and the post is waking up to another day of its ordinary, extraordinary existence. Marie-Anne is making the morning porridge. Pierre is feeding the horses. Batten has settled again near the kitchen door, his heavy head on his paws, his eyes half closed in the thin morning sun, and you are here with them, drifting in the warm light of a morning more than 200 years ago, in a place that no longer exists among people who have been gone for longer than anyone now living can remember. But they were here. They were real. They lived their days in this place with the same hunger and humor and tiredness and hope that you carry in your days. They looked at the same stars. They felt the same cold. They smelled the same wood smoke. And tonight, for a little while, so have you. Let the images dissolve now, gently and without haste. The trading room, with its shelves of bright goods, the forge and the gleam of new iron, the long table and the evening meal, the stars above the palisade walk, thick and cold and astonishing. Let them drift away, like smoke rising from a dying fire, up and away into the dark, dispersing into nothing. You are in your bed. The world around you is quiet. Everything is as it should be. The night is doing its patient, reliable work, the work of restoration and rest, and the slow healing of everything that the day has worn down. Your body is heavy and warm. Your breathing is slow. Your mind is quiet. The river runs, somewhere in the long ago, and its sound is the same sound as all rivers, the same patient murmur that has been running since the glaciers retreated and carved these valleys out of the rock, and will still be running when no one remembers the names of anyone who ever traded beaver pelts on its banks. The fire burns low. The dog sleeps by the kitchen door. The stars turn slowly overhead, and you are sleeping. You are already sleeping. The words are a river, and you are floating on it, and the river is carrying you gently and surely toward the deep, still country of full sleep, where there are no words, only rest. Sleep now. Rest. The post is safe. The river runs. The morning will come in its own good time, as it always has, as it always will. Good night.